Hello guys! In this video, we are talking about the types of variables and data that we can encounter while modeling some economic processes. First, let's begin with types of variables. The first type we will deal with is nominal or categorical variable. This is the variable that has two or more categories, but there is no intrinsic ordering to them. For example, a race, hair color, or geographical names, and so on. Binary variable is a special case of the nominal variable that has only two categories. For example, yes or no, male or female, and so on. If we are talking about the ordinal variable, it is similar to the nominal, but it has a clear ordering of values. For example, school grades or income categories. The interval variable has a clear order and intervals between the values are equally spaced. For example, dollars, centimeters, kilograms, and so on. You see the difference between $10 and $20 is the same like between 30 and 20. But if we're talking about the high income and middle income and low income, the difference between the low income and middle income may not be the same as the difference between the high income and the middle income. These are basic types of variables. Now let's take a look at the types of data. The first type is cross-sectional data. These are data collected by observing many objects such as individuals, firms, countries, or regions at the one point or a period of time. The second one is time series. These are the series of data points indexed in time order with a specific frequency. For example, a year, a quarter, a month, or a day. And finally, the third type is panel or longitudinal data. They contain observations of multiple phenomena obtained over multiple time periods for the same entities. Now let's take a look at the example of cross-sectional data. We have the table containing car sales statistics. We have the manufacturer, the model, the number of sales, the price, engine size, horsepower, wheelbase, width, length. So all these are characteristics of the specific model that is sold on the market. And these are the sales for one specific period of time. So the typical example of cross-sectional data shows us how many models we sold and how many units of each model we sold for some specific period of time. If we are talking about time series, we see in this table the data on the company advertising expenses and its trade. And all these features are measured for different time periods. So we have one object, a firm, that has some advertising expenses which are split into TV, press, radio, out of home, internet, and its corresponding trade for this period of time. For example, for January, for February, for March, for April, May, and so on. So this is the typical structure of time series. If we are talking about panel data, we have, for example, a corruption perception index measured in different countries for different periods of time. You see in the columns we have the year for which the corruption perception index is measured, and in rows we have the countries. But this is just one dimension. We can measure not only the corruption perception index, but for example, unemployment, inflation, GDP, and so on. So to store this information, it would require an additional dimension. So all these two-dimensional tables get stacked up like this, creating a three-dimensional cube. And such structure is called longitudinal data. Now let's briefly explain two types of time series. These types are flows and stocks. It's very important to mention that most macroeconomic accounts are flows. For example, GDP for the second quarter, or sales for the first quarter, or for February. And quantities and prices are stocks. For example, the number of unemployed persons as for October 12th. They can be measurements at a specific time or averages over a time period. And the main difference between these times, flows and stocks, concern the temporal aggregation. For example, with flows, annual data evolve from monthly data by sums. If you want to compute the annual GDP, you sum up the GDP for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and the fourth quarter. But if you want to compute the annual unemployment, which is the stock, then you may use the average. So you average across the unemployment in first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and the fourth quarter. So this is very important to note, otherwise you will have an incorrect analysis. The temporal aggregation is important when modeling flows and stocks, and please distinguish between these two types of time series. Finally, let's consider types of data by their genesis. And the first type is experimental data, which is very rare outside of experimental economics, which deals with setting experiment designs and making firms or individuals act according to some scenarios with some constraints, limitations, some features, and so on. And we measure this system, the different features of the system, and trying to make some conclusions on the behavior, on the evolution of the system, and so on. But of course, that's very difficult to perform experiments in real economy. That's why this genesis of the data is pretty rare. The second one, which is very common, this is samples. For example, pick 100 random people out of 3 million. What is usually used in microeconomics, which is marketing. When you decide to launch a new product, you want to understand whether it will be popular, that it will take some share of the market. And the third one is observational data. For example, GDP for 2014 exists only once and provided by a Federal Agency of Statistics. Typical case for macroeconomics, we can observe the evolving system and just see the indicators, the values of the indicators, and can try to make some conclusions, but we cannot perform the experiment. We cannot try to change this variable and see what happens, or rewind afterwards and change another one and see what happens. This is actually impossible, what makes economic analysis very complicated. So that's it for the types of data. Please continue watching my videos on econometrics. Thank you.